Hey, speaking of the Crows, we'll get into things right now. Heartbreakingly missed finals last year by an umpire's mistake. This season, they look quite far off the pace. And the fans are kind of wondering now, I guess, why they re-signed Matthew Nicks for 2 further seasons at the beginning of the year. Just a bit of a strange decision, but he's in his 5th season in charge now. They're now bottom 4. Or are they bottom 4? They think they're 15th on the ladder. So they're bottom 4. There was incremental, sustainable growth in his first few seasons leading up to where we are now. And obviously there was a bit of an explosion last season when they made their run towards finals. But it now looks like, Christian, and you've done some digging on the stats here, Adelaide's last year under Nicks might be the exception and not the rule. And this side might not quite be ready to take that next step.
Yeah, no, I got sucked into the Crows, and now doing this exercise this week for this show, to look at what Nicks has done each year that he's been there and what the Crows' strengths and weaknesses have been each year. So we know last year they were the number 1 scoring team, the most potent team inside 50. But it was sort of 1 year out of the box. So 2020, when he first got there, we know, COVID season, everyone played under duress and things like that, but it was a disastrous year. First year under the rebuild, they were 18th for points for, 18th for points against, 18th for time in forward half. Had a really high percentage of scores coming from their back 50. So again, the ball wasn't living in their forward half, so they had to go end to end to score. 16th for contested possession. So sort of just starting on the back foot, a lot what we're speaking about with West Coast and North Melbourne and Richmond earlier this year, where they were just getting smashed in so many areas. It's hard to get a good read on what profile they were sort of moving towards. 2021, we started to see it though. So they increased to 14th for points for, 16th for points against. They're still bottom 5 for sort of scoring at the 2 ends, but 3rd most points from defensive 50. So they took that ability to go from back 50 almost by necessity in year 1 and sort of turn that into a skill in year 2, that they were a good ball movement team. And they sort of started to break even a little bit more in contested possession, finished 11th for contested possession differential at the end of 2021, but just made those incremental increases in terms of, okay, we're going to be just a bit better to get our hands to the ball a bit earlier, but we know that we're good at scoring from back 50. We'll just sort of, we'll maintain that sort of track. 2022, he came in, and that's when the Crows to me sort of started to look like their profile had sort of risen to the top, and you could clearly see what type of coach Matthew Nicks was. And they were they were the second hardest team that year to move the ball against from one end to the other. They had a lot of stoppages per game. They ranked number 1 that year for forward half stoppages. So this is 2022, where they weren't looking to play finals. But of those bottom 10 teams, their profile clearly stood out to be they were the hardest team to play against. They were.
Well, I think they were top two players in top 5 in the tackles that year. I think it was Berry and it was Laird.
And Melbourne had come off
at the contest.
Melbourne had come off winning a premiership in 2021, basically as the best defensive team in the competition. We're going to be hard to play against, and then our offense is just going to come back off our defense, which is how Melbourne sort of won the flag in 2021. Crows come out in 2022, and a lot of like that. A lot of just shut the game down. Don't need to sort of go fast when we've got the ball. So they were 13th for points for across that season, but number 1 for forward half stoppages, and just really hard to sort of move the ball from end to end. So started to tick that sort of structure off, and then 2023 came around, and it was just all scoring. So they sort of became more mid-table for moving the ball against, more mid-table for stoppages. So the things that were a strength in 2022 dropped to mid-table, and they became number 1 for points for. They were number 1 for points from turnover, 3rd from clearances, 2nd most points from D50. So they could score, and they could score multiple ways. But disposal of this differential was 2nd, and uncontested possession differential was 2nd. So a lot of keepings off and high sort of possession games. Looking at the previous years for disposal differential, they went from 17th in Nick's first year to 12th to 13th to 2nd. Their uncontested possession differential went from 16th to 12th to 12th to 2nd. So it was sort of this explosion of, after being such a hard team to play against and sort of starting defensively, last year they became this sort of keepings off team. And it worked for them, as I said. They didn't get to the finals. They almost made finals, but they finished as the number 1 scoring team. And it's sort of like, well, is this going to be sort of what they're going to kick on with in 2024? They're going to now be the number 1 scoring team. They figured out how to move the ball, how to share it around. But looking at the previous 3 years, it wasn't a Nicks sort of game-style game plan. It's not a high uncontested possession team, high disposal. You look at where it's come to this year, very mid-table in all the stats, but one of the stats that stands out to me is they turn the ball over by foot, the 2nd most of any side. So they've gone from that chipping and kickings off team to when they do chip the ball around, they've turned it over, as I said, the 2nd most of any side. And Jordan Dawson, great kick. But if you look at probably their 3 worst turnovers against Richmond on Thursday night, I think they were all mainly responsible by Jordan Dawson coming out of the centre and just picking off a 20-metre target that would have been beautiful if he had hit it, but he missed the target. Richmond took an uncontested mark and went end to end. So I think a lot of their profile last year flipped a bit too dramatically to the offensive side, that they've lost the defensive side a little bit this year. And then we just talk about polish. So without Rankin in the side on Thursday, Rochelle up forward, not playing through the midfield. Crouch, we know he's not polished, but he's that first user and he gets it out into space. So they were missing him.
Yeah.
And I think the midfield to me just looked like it was just one pace. It missed that sort of, didn't have that dynamic player coming through there. So I think, without Crouch, with Dawson just a little bit off by foot, no Rankin and Rochelle not getting as much midfield time, it's taken that real sort of skill and speed out of their midfield, and they're sort of struggling without it.
Something a coach likes to do early in a tenure is establish those defensive aspects of a game and then add that attacking flair later. Why does it seem like they can't do both at once, or when they try and do something like attack more, they can't then, I don't know, keep that sort of
or how much of it is the other team as well, knowing what they did last year and going to work on that?
Well, I flagged it last year. I think a little bit is Adelaide themselves. In last year, they were taking the hardest shots of any team and scoring at one of the best expected accuracy. So I remember flagging it last year, going, they're the number one scoring team, but they seem to be a team to me that this year they're getting away with it. And I felt like it was going to turn where there'll be a game where the Adelaide Crows would finish with 5 goals, 15. You'd be like, geez, they were just having pot shots from the boundary and they weren't sort of looking for the easy
Well, you think
options.
about those forward half options, and it's Taylor Walker, who's realistically, for the better part of 10 years, has been one of the best set shots. Rankin is really good in front of goal. Fogarty as well is a guy who's pretty good in front of the big sticks when he gets his chances. Thilthorpe went fit. So I guess, yes, if you start to sort of, come back to the mean a bit, then you start to miss these opportunities and your scoring goes down, and then you feel maybe pressured to take those 25-metre kicks through the corridor on the 45 that get turned over. So, I mean,
There's deficiencies.
What needs to happen? Is it just the fact they can't get the personnel where they want it? Do you need to put, when Rankin's back and fit, do you need to have him in the midfield for? Is he more valuable up forward?
They need to change
Does Rochelle need more time there? I mean, you kind of saw Jake Saligo had such a great start to the year, but has maybe, tapered off a little bit. I mean, it just sort of seems like they don't know what their best mix is, and that's helping them suffer.
Yeah, and I think Nick Murray's going to be a really good inclusion in the back line as well. For them, Mark Keane's improved a lot this season. One of the most improved players in the competition, in my opinion. They will get better. Rankin comes back, Tex comes back, and Thilthorpe, I think, adds a lot in their forward half as well. But I'm not as doom and gloom on Adelaide. Like, they had that 0-4 start. Their next 6-week stretch before Richmond, they won 4 matches, but they lost 2 by 3 points and 4 points, and were pretty stiff in both of those games. They beat the Blues and they drew with the Lions. So the results are all over the place, and clearly they've got some things to work on. But they're in the bottom 4, but with what percentage? A winning percentage of 107.
Good point.
I actually forgot to ask you this, admittedly, before the episode, but I looked back until 2010 at the bottom 4 at round 13, and this is the highest percentage bottom 4 team, has been at round 13 since 2010. They're usually in the 80s, 90s max. So they've got a winning season despite what their results suggest. But to me, it just seems like they're like that one big marquee player away. So it makes sense why they're going after the talk is Elliot Yeo. They're throwing money at. They're trying for Clayton Oliver last year.
Yep.
I think they are that one marquee player away.
So taking all this into account, what is your vibe for the rest of their season? You look at their percentage, but then you look at what they're doing with ball in hand. Can you see them playing finals?
Probably not at this stage again. I think there's just too many teams above them. I think they can get back to playing some of their best footy in the next 9 to final 10 rounds of the season. But there's a few teams that you look at. How are Brisbane Bulldogs, Adelaide and Melbourne all going to get back into the 8? That's a lot of teams to try to take 4 spots. So I think...
And what's the stats statistically after round
usually
6? It's 2 changes or something like that?
3 changes at the most.
I think there were 3 last season. So it will be tough, absolutely.
Fair effort.
Yeah, going back to the percentage, you can see they're doing a lot of things right. But I think looking at the whole 5-year sort of evolution of Adelaide, it sort of hasn't... The first 3 years you could sort of see a nice linear sort of increase in defence, and then the last 2 years sort of been the offence just exploded last year, and then this year it sort of hasn't kicked on, and then your turnovers have come through and things like that. So I think it's more about the trajectory that they're on. I think you just got to get them back into being hard to play against. It's more of a sustainable
rise.
Get back the defensive side of your game and go from there again.
I think it's more about next year. So they'll win some games this year, but it's more about next year. And
Pros fans have been saying that for 4 or 5 years now.
That's fine, but after re-signing Nix, you do have to now put your faith in. He's re-signed for 2 more seasons. So if they start slowly next season, I think that's when I do get doom and gloom, but I'm not now.